Welcome back, Bizarre Society and Bizarre Rights, to the most bizarre show in the universe. I am the one that some refer to as Shane, aka the original Shane Squatch. And alongside me, as per usual, I have who?
Who's your daddy?
The big bad Boo Daddy himself, Sir Orin Felix.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you for having me yet again. So we've gone from being the most bizarre show on the internet to the most bizarre show in the universe.
I thought we've expanded a little bit, you know, because now we're getting into like otherworldly concepts. We're getting into like fourth dimensional concepts. We're getting into some really weird stuff. So at this point, I feel like we've expanded past the internet, and now we're the most bizarre show in the universe. So we might as well claim the title of being the most bizarre everything out there, because that's just our quota and that's our name, right?
Do we have to win some sort of like cage match or something to win the universal title as opposed to the internet title? Like how did that work? I'm just curious.
Well, if you remember, there was another podcast that tried to use the name Bizarre Encounters, but unfortunately, they only ended up dropping 2 episodes, so we didn't end up getting to the point of having to get to caged, combat. So I think it's one of those things that, like, we claim the title because nobody else has tried to claim it yet, but if somebody does try to claim it, we might have to try to defend it. But the other people who tried to claim it, they backed down, so I don't know, maybe we got something a little scary going on over here.
They didn't want none of this, I guess.
They don't want none of the Boo Daddy, and they don't want none of the Shane Squatch, man. We're like the ultimate tag team. It's perfect.
Hey, if you say so, man. But anyway, so not too many news and updates for tonight's episode. Just our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries, which is our YouTube live show, will be Monday, July 6th. So after you guys have your 4th of July weekend and you're all hungover and sunburned and whatnot, you can come hang out with us on July 6th. It's going to be roughly 7:15 Eastern time on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. And as always, you guys submit any questions, articles, questions. I said questions twice, didn't I?
That's okay. They can submit double questions. That's cool too.
Double questions and join us in the chat. I mean, we go over this every week. You guys know what's up by now.
And if you don't, then maybe you should pop into the show and check it out.
There you go. And also, if anyone wants to get up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shane, how can they do that?
You guys can do that through emailing us, which is bizarreencounters@outlook.com. You guys can also get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the two that we are the most active on. You can also get a hold of us through our hotline, and you guys can call or text that 24/7, and that number is 313-364-1551. And last but not least, for any professional inquiries, you guys can get a hold of us at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com. And if you guys happen to miss any of that, where is it available, Oren?
In the link tree in the show description.
And as far as what we're getting into today, I kind of have an idea of what we might be getting into today if people haven't already seen the cover.
Hi, I'm Bob.
I'm assuming, we're going to be talking about Bob. So what are we going to be diving into as far as Bob goes today, man?
All right, so just a little refresher and recap from last week's episode, Bob Lazar Part 1. We talked a little bit about Bob Lazar's background, a little bit about how he came to work for this U.S. government kind of program at S4/Area 51, that whole area.
I specifically wore this shirt just for today, by the way. I picked it out specifically just to do this episode. Storm Area 51, because if you want to get more info on Bob Lazar, you got to start the rebellion somewhere, man. Shout out to Joe for Crypto Theology for making this awesome shirt, too.
Well, I specifically wore my Stanley Cup champion Carolina Hurricanes jersey today, so...
I was waiting for you to get to a point where you were going to bring that up, and I'm surprised that it didn't happen at all really this season, that we didn't get into this whole feud back and forth between the Devils and the Carolina Hurricanes. But as soon as I saw they made it the Stanley Cup, dude, I was just waiting for you to just slide something in there at some point, and there it is.
Well, hey, I waited till they won. I was a gentleman about it.
Yeah, at least you're a gentleman about it. My team got knocked out a while ago, so I ain't even mad. I get it, man. Props to you, man.
Well, no, it's been a hell of a ride here these past few weeks. It's been a lot of fun seeing the city kind of rally around this team. And, it's definitely exciting times here in Raleigh. But anyway, getting back...
Not to cut away, but didn't you get to go to the finals, by the way? Didn't I see something getting...
No, so like the tickets were outrageously expensive. They were like $1,200 a ticket. But we rode out to the stadium. It's like 4 miles from where we live, and so we got some merchandise at the store and just walked around and took pictures and stuff. But I didn't actually get to go to any of the games, but we still got to enjoy some of the festivities. So that was pretty cool.
Hey, it was still pretty cool, man. I was gonna say I didn't know if you ended up getting like free tickets or something like that from work, or if somebody was passing them out. But either way, I remember seeing a picture of you posting that you were somewhere around there. So I thought you lucked out and actually got to go to the game.
No, definitely not that lucky or that wealthy. But like I said, we did get to hang out at the stadium a little bit, and we bought some merch. I bought like a polo shirt. Jenny bought like a Champs T-shirt. So we had a good time. So yeah, I guess we'll have to just see if they can repeat next year.
Hey, man, if New Jersey Devils take it next year, I'll be going to get myself a championship hat.
There you go. Hey, maybe it'll be like the Devils versus the Canes in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Hey, man, that'll be a very there'll be a lot of angst between us at that point.
It'll tear the show apart.
It'll tear the show apart.
All right. Anyway, so jumping into tonight's material after the Stanley Cup update here.
My bad, everybody.
So, as you guys remember, Bob Lazar was working at S4, and eventually he was able to kind of observe this test flight of one of these supposedly extraterrestrial crafts. He was allowed to like go inside the craft and see it for himself. But anyway, after he observed this test flight, he was not called back into work for several weeks. So we're going to kind of pop in back into the notes with the aftermath of Bob Lazar's story.
It's a UFO!
There you go. So even though he was not called back into work for several weeks, he continued to be monitored by those two guys who were kind of like parked across the street from his house. And they also began to start following him around like as he went about his daily routine. And the constant presence of these guys and kind of being followed and observed started to like really make Bob anxious. And so he ultimately decided to report these guys to the police.
I got an easy solution for that.
Bang, splat, real fast.
Well, we're going to kind of get into that. So anyway, this police squad car showed up at his house, and an officer got out and appeared to like speak with these two guys. But a few minutes later, the officer got back into his car and left, and the two guys kind of remained there watching Bob. So obviously, whatever these guys said to the police didn't want any part of it, and they just left and let them do whatever they wanted to do.
Just a matter of flashing their badge and going, "We outrank you, man. Sit back down and leave."
Yeah, they pulled rank on that one. But anyway, after this happened and Bob reported these guys to the police, this like kind of monitoring and following kind of escalated into these blatant acts of intimidation and basically just like fucking with Bob. So one day he was working out at a local gym, and afterwards when he went out to his car in the parking lot, both of his car doors were like standing wide open, but nothing was stolen or damaged. So he kind of suspected that these two guys that kept following him did this just to send a message and basically show him, hey, this is what we can do. We can get this close to you. We can fuck with you if we want to. And so after this incident at the gym, Lazar repeatedly tried to call Dennis, which, if you'll remember from part one, was his kind of like boss, I guess, at S4. But each time he tried to call this guy, he got like a receptionist and was told that it was not possible for him to speak to Dennis. And at that point, he kind of started to fear for his own safety. And he pretty much assumed that like his time working at S4 was over. So he decided that the best way at this point to kind of make sure that he stayed safe was to start sharing his story and his experiences with like his wife and some of his close friends.
Not to cut in, but do you know why, or is there a reason why that he mentioned in the book or anything like that, why all of a sudden it seemed like the script flipped on him all of a sudden?
We're going to get into that later.
Okay, perfect. I would say I have some theories, of course, unless he actually gets into it, but not to side tangent. I was just curious.
Yeah, so we're going to touch on that in just a minute. But this is kind of a funny little tidbit, I think. Also, around this time, he received the first and only paycheck that he ever got from working this job, and it was for $958.11. So this guy, went through all this trouble and basically had his life turned upside down for less than $1,000. So that's
thank you for your contribution.
Yeah, that's
it's
kind of
the
funny.
U.S. government.
All right, so do you have anything you want to add before we jump into the next section?
No, sir.
All right. So when Lazar decided that he was going to start telling his wife and his friends about all of his experiences, one of the first people that he told was a man named John Lear. And this was a guy that Lazar had met through a mutual friend. And he was actually the son of the founder of Learjet. His name is Bill Lear. And yeah, I've got a picture of him here. So this is in his younger days. And this guy was like a notoriously accomplished pilot, like just basically like the Michael Jordan of piloting. But later in his life, he became like a conspiracy theorist and really leaned hard into like extraterrestrials and UFOs and things like that.
Ironic how it's always the people that are around those spots the most that end up getting into that stuff. Like, anybody that's a soldier doesn't trust the government at all. Yeah. Anybody that's a pilot gets into UFO stuff. Anybody that's a logger or, like a hunter gets into like the Bigfoot stuff. Kind of ironic that nobody wants to believe them, but these are the people who are really spending the time there.
Yeah, and probably know the most about that kind of thing,
Exactly.
Pick up on what's bullshit and what's something legitimate.
Especially these pilots, man. I mean, if anybody's up there really saying anything, it's these pilots. So, you hear about constant cases where they'll come across like weird stuff and, they'll be told basically just to hush hush about it, not say anything about it. And usually they're told that, they'll revoke their pilot's license if they mention anything about it, which is usually why they end up pressuring a lot of these pilots into not talking about this type of stuff. But again, like the most qualified people that are spending all this time up in the sky, they're noticing changes. They see things that are constantly flying around. They're familiar with different types of aircraft. But again, nobody wants to believe them.
Yeah. So, it's just one of those things like we talk about all the time. Like most people who encounter these sort of things, I think actually believe what they're saying. But when it's someone that's a pilot or a soldier or somebody like that kind of should know better, I think their opinion, kind of carries a little bit more weight than the average person.
Exactly.
All right, so after speaking with John Lear, Bob Lazar kind of decided that the best way to substantiate these claims and basically just let everybody know that he wasn't fucking crazy was to take some of his friends out to the desert to try to observe one of these test flights for themselves. So during his time working at S4, he had kind of figured out that the test flights seemed to be generally conducted on Wednesdays at about 8 p.m., and this seems like kind of a trivial, nothing throwaway detail, but as I was reading this in the book, it reminded me a lot of John Keel's Wednesday phenomenon, which I believe we talked about a little bit in our Mothman series. But according to Keel, quote, I had collected and analyzed some 700 UFO reports from 1966 and discovered that the greatest number of the sightings, 20%, took place on Wednesdays. I call this the Wednesday phenomenon. Keel also stated, quote, the Wednesday phenomenon works. I've been studying it for years, and I still can't say why it works. Researchers in other parts of the world have now followed my example and found similar time patterns in the sightings of their own countries. And Keel kind of goes on to say that 10 p.m. on a Wednesday is the best time to allegedly see a UFO, and that this goes, quote, well beyond the laws of chance and averages. And I think this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, if John Keel says that 10 p.m. on a Wednesday is the best time to see one of these things, Keel was based on the East Coast. Bob Lazar is kind of on the West Coast out in the desert. So, 10 p.m. East time is pretty much 8 p.m. Western Mountain Time when Bob said, that's when these tests were conducted. So this kind of gets into a whole lot of government experimentation, human intervention type angles. Cause
just another string.
Exactly. Because I highly doubt these aliens have human clocks and calendars that they're planning their appearances around,
That's one of those things where it's almost too close to the phenomenon, where it's Keel is so far into the phenomenon that it's just staying back for 2 seconds and you're all right, this seems like a very human thing to do, to be at this exact time at this exact place. And it's, again, matter of perspective that I'm sure Keel's seeing this. He's all right, this is exactly what it is. But then as soon as you bring back the broader perspective of getting into these human trials and everything with this, then of course it's boom, that's valid proof right there about human experimentation and, trying to basically fly under the radar, pretending like it's a UFO flap. This is exactly what we've been talking about for the past year.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. I think this was kind of the coolest piece of information that I discovered in the research for this one. Bob Lazar, for whatever anybody wants to say about him, he seems like a very kind of, straight to the facts, black and white type of guy. He's a scientist. He doesn't dabble in a whole lot of conjecture and gray area. And John Keel is basically the exact opposite of that. You know, he lives in gray area. So for these two guys to basically come about this same phenomenon in these vastly different ways, like you said, there's something to it. And, you know, kind of the common denominator to me seems some sort of human or government angle to it.
And I mean, even to throw something in going with exactly what you were saying about Bob Lazar, I don't know if you bring it up during any of this, but the whole thing about when people ask him if he'd ever actually seen an extraterrestrial or anything like that, and he never says yes directly. The only thing he really says about it is that he remembers seeing like a very oddly short person at one point in one of the rooms, but he didn't want to say that it was specifically like an extraterrestrial or anything like that. But he said it just seemed strikingly odd that they were so short. So it's like, even within that context, it's like, he's not expanding the story into something that it's like, oh, you know, I'm working at this base with extraterrestrials going around and we're in contact with all these people. It's like, you ask him directly and he's like, I don't know, I maybe saw one once, but I don't know for sure. So I'm not going to say that it is. And again, maybe it could be part of the psyop, or again, it just kind of brings some more validity into a lot of this Bob Lazar stuff.
Yeah. And even in the book and, you know, in a lot of the appearances and interviews and things like that he's done, especially the early ones, it seems like he took a lot of care to just be very factual and report, you know, only what he knew and what he witnessed and what he worked on, and not like go into wild conjecture. And kind of touching on your point, you know, people have kind of poo-pooed and criticized him for like not being able to show any proof of these things. You know, he's never been able to show proof, quote unquote, of these crafts or extraterrestrial beings or anything like that.
Instead of talking about an element that didn't exist until like 20 something years later.
But, you know, that's really not what he's setting out to do, in my opinion. He's just talking about like what he experienced and what he saw. And if that's not good enough for some people, and if that's not enough proof, I mean, I kind of don't know what to tell you at that point. You know?
Yeah, he's just an imperialistic thinker. He doesn't want to, you know, I mean, a lot of people, they get into this type of stuff, and it's like, as soon as you start throwing theories in and everything, that's where people start kind of like taking away from like the validity of what you're actually doing the research in. But it's just like people like Jeff Meldrum, you know, before he had passed away, he really didn't get into any of the woo-woo stuff with Sasquatch because he wanted people to take his research seriously, considering that he was coming at it from, you know, like a scholarly background and trying to bring more validity to Bigfoot. It's like, sometimes, again, if you want to bring validity to your story, you can't even like attempt to partially dabble and theorize in certain zones, because you just want to say the straight hard facts so that, again, nothing can be spun and flipped into something that was never intended to be. So again, that kind of just goes back into this whole alien thing that the guy literally never said I saw one. He just said, I saw a really short guy. That was it. I don't know.
And it's kind of a lose-lose situation. So if he doesn't, you know, speculate and go on wild goose chases and all this conjecture and whatnot, people have criticized him for that. And if he did do all those things, people would criticize him still. So, I mean, when you start speaking out about these weird fringe topics, you're going to get criticized no matter what. So, I mean, you might as well just do whatever you want to at that point.
Ain't that the truth, man? No matter what, people are always going to try to find a hole in your story, even if it's 100% factual truth. I mean, that's just, I guess, the mind of a conspiracy theorist.
All right, so jumping back in, Lazar and his wife and buddies decided that on the following Wednesday, they were going to drive out into the desert in John Lear's motorhome and attempt to observe one of these test flights. So on the night in question, they kind of packed up the motorhome, drove out, and they parked on what they thought was public land that was located near S4. And they kind of like set up a little base camp. They set up a telescope and a video cassette recorder and like camping chairs and whatnot just for them to observe the test flight. And shortly after 8 p.m., they saw this like bright orange light suddenly appear in the sky over S4. And according to Bob, the craft moved in, quote, what I could only describe as a staircase maneuver, appearing at one height and then up, over, up, and over. And this kind of flight pattern, it seems like, is pretty common in like UFO reports. People sometimes call it like a falling leaf pattern. So basically he's saying that this thing kind of is just popping from like one location to the next, and it's not traveling in a linear straight line, which, you know, makes a lot of sense given Bob's kind of theories and hypothesis about the propulsion system and how it works and whatnot. So after a few minutes, the light craft, whatever you want to call it, descended below a nearby mountain range and disappeared, and it seemed like the test flight was over at that point. So after this happened, Lazar and his friends were just kind of in this state of like amazement and joy and exuberance. So they kind of made plans to come back the next week. And when they came back the following Wednesday, the test flight kind of began in the same manner as the first one that they saw. But what's interesting is shortly after it started, the craft appeared to like fly directly over where Lazar and his buddies were positioned. And then it went back to its original position and disappeared behind the mountain range, and the test was over. So kind of interesting. The first time they went out there, it seemed like a very run-of-the-mill test flight. And then, they just observed it from a distance. It disappeared. And then the second one, it flew directly over them. So did whomever was conducting this test flight know they were out there? It brings up some interesting questions, I think.
I still want to go back to the idea of who potentially would be able to fly these things if they go the speed that they actually go. Mm-hmm. Because are these things being like computer piloted possibly, or is there a special type of person that's able to fly these things like that? That's still a question that I want to know, is how these things are actually getting piloted in the first place.
Yeah, and that's, again, a question that he doesn't really answer. He said when he was able to observe the craft up close and go inside it, that it appeared like it was made for something the size of like a 7 or 8 year old child. But it could be one of those situations like horse jockeys, like maybe the government's breeding these super small dudes to fly these crafts. Who knows?
They're just taking telepathic kids straight out of Project Montauk, and they're making them fly UFOs.
Stranger Things. You heard it here first. All right, you want to do an ad break?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so after Bob and his wife and buddies observed this second test flight, they once again decided that they were going to make plans to return the following Wednesday and try to watch these test flights again. However, on that Tuesday, so the day before they were supposed to go out into the desert, Lazar received a telephone call instructing him to report for work at S4 the next day. So this is kind of interesting. This thing flies directly over him, hasn't heard shit from S4 and his bosses in weeks, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he gets this call telling him to come into work the next day.
Just to throw this idea in, how we've talked about how these ships could potentially be flown by people that are telepathic, mm-hmm. and that would be potentially one of the ways that you'd be able to fly these things. If that is the case, anybody that would be telepathic, if you could already pre-see things that are going to happen, you could predict everything that's going to happen, anything that might be able to come into your flight path. Maybe that could be where the weirdness comes in with UFOs, that they seem to always know when somebody's watching them, is because it has something to do with that telepathic connection, where if somebody's actually looking at these things, they become aware of that person looking at them. So going into that, of course, if you potentially have to be telepathic to fly these things, then maybe that whole him being out in the field was why they called him back, because again, whoever was flying the ship sensed that he was there.
Well, and that also kind of gets into CE5 type stuff, and these people who are supposedly able to go out into the desert and basically through ritual and intention and manifestation make these kind of crafts appear. So it
works on the reverse.
Yeah, exactly. So even if these are just government reverse engineered crafts, there still very well could be some sort of very strange esoteric element to it.
Hey, even as a bit of an expansion kind of going into part of this theory, I mean, I think we've partially talked about it a little bit on the show, but the whole super soldier program, theory / conspiracy, I mean, maybe that kind of plays a role into this too, or maybe part of what they're trying to do with a certain subsection of some of these super soldiers is try to make it so that they're able to pilot these ships. Yeah. Maybe, of course, there's ones they want to use as the berserkers on the battlefield, like the Captain America type ones. But there's probably another group that's intended to be the smaller ones that are extremely intelligent, and they're supposed to be the pilot class.
Well, I mean, how many movies and TV shows and whatnot have we seen about basically the government trying to do things exactly like that? Either genetically modify or train people with innate special abilities to do things like this for political and military gains. So, I mean, I think we'd be stupid to think that the government wasn't trying to do shit like that.
And I mean, realistically, half of what you'd have to do for being a really good pilot is basically having extremely fast reflexes. So, I mean, thinking about that doesn't really seem like it's that far off to really start doing experiments on. It doesn't seem super duper woo woo when your whole intention is to try to make it so that somebody has like the fastest reflexes that they could possibly have, like cat-like reflexes, you know?
Yeah, and remote viewing and all that sort of thing that we know the government was involved with, that would just be par for the course as far as I'm concerned.
Like I said, I think it all kind of messes into, you know, almost like how this whole thing was. It's compartmentalized, where it's like you have all these separate pieces, but maybe it's intended to all kind of go into this bigger program to make it so that, you know what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so jumping back into the notes, basically, Bob had no intention of reporting for work the next day. He was just kind of done with this whole thing at that point. He was tired of them not calling him back. He was tired of like his security clearance taking so long. He was tired of basically being jerked around by these guys and just the secrecy and non-collaborative working environment. He was basically just done. So he decided pretty much, fuck it. We're going to go out tomorrow and observe this test flight anyway. So the next day they, got out into the desert and they were setting up their equipment like usual. But as they were setting up, this car that they had not seen when they were driving up suddenly like turned on its headlights. And at this point, Bob kind of like ducked behind this nearby bush and hid from, this car and its headlights. So a man got out of the car and he identified himself as installation security. And he basically told Bob so Bob was hiding, but he told like the wife and his friends that they were on military property and that they needed to leave the area. So his friends kind of went back and forth with this guy and argued with him a little bit about, hey, no, this is public land. We're allowed to be here, yada, yada, yada. But eventually, they just decided it was best to leave. So they got in the car and drove away while Bob was still like hiding in this bush.
Fuck Bob.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bob.
So after the security guy kind of left the area, Bob ran through the desert and caught up with his friend's car. And they were driving away from the area out on the main road. And as they were driving along the main road, there was this police car like blocking the road, apparently like waiting for them. And so they stopped, and this police officer got out of the car and came up to Bob and his friend's car. And he said that he got a radio message from installation security, and they had told him about a suspicious vehicle carrying 4 passengers. Well, when he stopped them, there was now 5 passengers because, Bob had ran through the desert and caught up with the car later. So at this point, this police officer collected all of their IDs and went back to his car, supposedly running their information and whatnot. And after a while, he came back and returned their IDs. And when he handed Bob his, he said, quote, "I guess they know who you are down there. Dun, dun, dun."
Dun, dun, dun. They know you, Bob.
Yeah, they know you, Bob. So the following day, Bob received a phone call from Dennis. So Dennis hadn't, returned his calls for weeks at this point, and he gets caught out there in the desert with his buddies. Then Dennis wants to talk to him. So he said that he would be at Bob's house in 25 minutes. And when he arrived, he instructed Lazar to drive them to a nearby Air Force base called Indian Springs Air Force Base. And an interesting detail about this is when Dennis got to his house, when Bob answered the door, like it didn't appear that this guy had like arrived in a vehicle or anything. Like there was no car around. Like he didn't hear a car pull up, didn't hear car doors or anything. This guy just like showed up on his doorstep, which interestingly is like a hallmark of a lot of Men in Black cases. These guys just appear to like knock on people's doors, no cars around, or when they disappear, they basically just disappear out in the yard and walk away and there's no cars or anything like that. So obviously this Dennis guy is probably a government agent. He's not some sort of John Keel ultra-terrestrial MIB, but I still thought that was kind of an interesting detail that Bob pointed out.
A GI MIB, dare I say?
There you go. I forgot we.
I'm going to keep using that one. I even shared that one with Nomar. He said he's going to start using that one too. He likes it too.
Hey, it's catching on. So anyway, when Bob and Dennis arrived at this base, they went into just like a standard-looking office building, and they were joined by these 2 other men. And at this point, Dennis just started berating Bob and like demanded to know what he was doing out there and who are those people, and basically, what the hell do you think you're doing? And Lazar kind of tried to like play all this down, like, hey man, like everybody in this area knows there's some sort of test flights that go on out there. It's no big deal. When my friends and family found out that I worked at S4, they were just curious about what was going on. But he made sure to like really, really hammer home the point that he didn't divulge any secret information. He didn't divulge like the true nature of his work. He basically just, drove them out there to the desert. So I don't think this Dennis guy was really buying that. So he demanded that Bob write down like all the names and contact information of everybody that was with him, which Bob kind of reluctantly did. And at that point, Dennis told him to go home and wait for another phone call. And this next part kind of touches on something that you hit earlier. So as he was leaving, Dennis handed him a file folder that contained documents that proved that Lazar's wife was having an affair with her flight instructor. And Bob kind of speculated that this was part of the reason for him being followed by these men in black and for the security clearance taking so long, is they were monitoring like this situation with his wife. And he kind of thought that, the government didn't want to approve his security clearance because of this situation going on and didn't want him to be like a loose cannon or whatever. So he kind of, in a roundabout way, blamed his wife's affair on why he didn't get his security clearance.
I was assuming that it was maybe that he was starting to kind of talk to people and maybe connect the projects that are kind of like, all right, this guy's getting a little too involved. Maybe we don't want him involved on the project. But I mean, I could definitely see this end too, because he's already slightly starting to become a loose end. I mean, they already didn't call him for a couple of weeks, and he's already taken friends out to the middle of the desert to see this thing. I mean, regardless of what he says, looking at it from like the military perspective, you have this guy that's an employee and he just like shows up in the desert with a bunch of friends. Like, this Dennis's perspective, like, he's like, dude, I tried to show you all this stuff and now you're just like bringing random people out here. Like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, this is exactly why we can't trust you with this clearance.
Yeah, and supposedly, according to Lazar's own account, like, he hadn't talked to anybody about the true nature of his work or anything like that before they didn't call him back. But anyway, yeah, so kind of interesting, a few weeks go by and he decides that he's just going to tell everybody he knows about, what he was doing out there in the desert.
And I'm not trying to vouch for the government by any means, so I don't want anybody to take it that way. But at least from like that perspective, it's like totally understandable why he got his clearance revoked.
Yeah, he was kind of a loose cannon. But anyway, so
even before figuring out about the fair, that was already a problem.
Yeah. So following this like meeting with Dennis, several days went by and they were kind of uneventful. He just kind of discussed the situation with his friends and kind of let them know what was going on. Him and his wife had some tough conversations and decided that they were going to go their separate ways, and his wife moved out. But one day he was driving home from running an errand, and this car began like aggressively following him, like right up on his tail, and even like attempted to run him off of the road. So
Bang, splat, real fast.
Tried to, at least.
So he was trying to get away from this car. And at one point he took an on-ramp at like this high rate of speed to try to get away from this car. But the car like pulled up next to him, like in the grass on the on-ramp. And he heard a gunshot. And at that point his car like swerved sideways into the grass and the pursuing car sped away. So Lazar got out of his car and he discovered that they had shot out one of his back tires. So at this point, he kind of limped his car back home and decided that he needed to call his buddy John Lear. But this whole situation kind of reminds me of like the whole William Cooper, Behold a Pale Horse stuff, where he talks about how basically this same thing happens to a lot of UFO experiencers and people in the know and whatnot. Is either they get like mysteriously run over while crossing the street, or they have some sort of vehicular accident very similar to this. So there are, again, some more connections to kind of more conspiratorial and kind of out there fringe topics.
See, it seems like it's kind of a progression, though. And I don't know if you've kind of noticed with this one, at least, that it's like, it could be one of those things kind of like the Clintons where they just blatantly, obviously this guy got into a car accident because there was a gunshot in his back tire. But it almost kind of seems like at first when you really start getting into this extraterrestrial stuff, like even some, conspiracy guys that really started diving into some of like the extraterrestrial species, they'll kind of claim that it's like a progression, that they'll kind of do like this like strong arm thing where it's like when they're at this point, they're not actually trying to like kill you yet. They're basically just trying to say, we literally almost just killed you. Do you want to continue doing this kind of shit? So it's like, you'd assume that like their first action would just be to take that swift, like cut off the head, call it a day. But it seems like there's this like built up violent progression, especially with this like extraterrestrial stuff, that it's like with other stuff, it almost kind of seems like they would just take care of it instantly. But with this, it's like they almost kind of give you some warnings, but they get more violent as they go on.
Yeah, that's kind of my impression as well, because, you know, if these guys could pull up beside him and shoot out his tire at a high rate of speed, I mean, that's having to be a pretty fucking accurate shot. They probably could have shot him if they wanted to. But yeah, it totally seems like it's sending a message more so than anything else.
And then once you get to that point, then, you know, it's like completely mysterious where, you know, they're not going to leave any clues or anything like a bullet hole in your back tire or something. It'll be, you know, something that has absolutely no tie back to any of them.
So kind of piggybacking off of that point, when Bob talked to John Lear, they kind of decided that the best way for him to ensure his safety at this point was to go public with this story. Like, not just tell, you know, his wife and a few friends, like go public with it. And remember, this is like 1989, so it's before the internet, it's before social media and all that sort of thing. So they decided that they were going to contact a reporter for a local television station called KLAS TV. And this reporter's name was George Knapp. And most of our listeners are probably familiar with George Knapp. He needs no introduction for our video watchers and viewers. There's a picture of George Knapp. In addition to like the whole Bob Lazar Area 51 stuff, he's also really known for like the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. He's one of the co-writers of like the main Skinwalker Ranch book. Basically, if you're into these topics at all, you've seen this guy on documentaries or, you know, History Channel, things like that.
I've never noticed till just now how very similar he looks to Riker from Star Trek Next Generation.
Yeah, he does. I've never thought about that, but you are
like a little bit older of a version of Riker.
Maybe it's like his dad or something.
Wouldn't that be weird? Especially considering the whole Star Trek connection with, you know, deep space programs and all that kind of stuff. So maybe.
So anyway, George Knapp and the station manager at the KLS TV television station came to John Lear's compound, and they met with Bob Lazar. And they decided that they were going to do an interview. So they conducted this interview the following day at John Lear's compound. But Bob requested that he only be shown in silhouette and that his real name not be used. But it's kind of funny, he picked the pseudonym of Dennis to be used for the interview, which obviously is like a jab to his boss at S4. And I've got kind of like a screenshot of that interview if you want to pull that up.
See, this is what I'm saying, man. It's like, people can say what they want about the Bob Lazar story, but it's like, this guy's kind of a troll, low-key. Like, he's been trolling this guy since the beginning. They're like, all right, don't tell anybody our secrets. He's like, well, I just took my friends to see some UFOs. I didn't tell them what we were doing specifically. I just wanted to take them to see some UFOs. And then this guy tries to strong arm him, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to come out as my name being Dennis.
Yeah, Bob Lazar, petty as hell.
Mad respect for this guy. It's kind of hilarious, though.
During the interview, Lazar told George Knapp about like his experiences with the extraterrestrial crafts and kind of about the nature of his work at S4. Like we were saying earlier, he kind of just told him like the black and white facts, didn't get into conjecture and theory and things like that. So I believe the initial interview aired the next day, and it was edited down to about 2 minutes from, you know, the several minutes worth of questioning and interviewing that they did. But after the interview aired, Bob received a threatening telephone call from his buddy Dennis. And
of course,
he said something to the effect of, "Bob, do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now? Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun."
All right.
Perfect spot for an ad break, right?
Perfect. That's why I put it there. All right, you good?
I'm going to end it on the hard done.
Okay, so several weeks went by before Bob was contacted by Dennis again. And at this point, he requested that he and Bob meet in person. And Bob agreed to this under one condition, that the meeting occur in a public place. So he suggested like 8 p.m. at the Union Plaza Casino that's located in downtown Las Vegas. So also for more like security and peace of mind, Bob enlisted 2 of his buddies to kind of accompany him to this meeting, and they were supposed to just like observe from afar, like not get involved or anything, basically make sure that Bob didn't get kidnapped and thrown in the back of a van and, taken out in the desert and shot.
I was going to say, it almost kind of feels like sometimes the public places can be just as bad as the secret places, because a lot of the time you have the bystander effect anyways, where it's like, even if somebody theoretically stabs somebody in public, grab them, threw them in a van, people are going to sit and watch for like 5 minutes before anybody even interacts. And by then it's like they're already completely gone. So it's like, is public really any less inconspicuous? And half the time, I mean, depending on where you're at, if you're Las Vegas, New York, I mean, there's so many characters down there that if anybody's acting weird, anybody's doing strange, it's not going to draw any attention. If anybody gets kidnapped, like, it's not going to draw any attention. Like, out of anywhere you could have picked, downtown Las Vegas doesn't seem like a top place that I would have picked.
Well, and again, this is 1989. This is before people had cell phones and social media and all that. So yeah, you could totally just fucking kidnap a guy and throw him in the back of the van. And I mean, unless you were like right there to witness it, you probably wouldn't have any fucking idea what was going on.
And everybody in downtown Las Vegas is probably so drunk out of their ass all day that they'd be like, hey, what'd that guy look like? They're like, 2 guys? What color were they? I'm fucking 2 guys. What do you mean?
So anyway, jumping back in, when Bob and his 2 buddies arrived at the casino for the meeting, Dennis was like nowhere to be found. And they waited for him for a few minutes. But after waiting for a while, Dennis asked the casino staff, Lazar asked the casino staff to page Dennis and, quote, ask him to meet his party at the entrance to the blackjack room. And a few minutes after that, Bob could see Dennis like weaving his way through the crowd toward the blackjack room.
After being like, damn it, why'd you call my name on the loudspeaker again? Why do you keep doing this?
Again, just kind of trolling him. But anyway, when Dennis reached the entrance of the blackjack room where like Bob was standing, he just walked directly past him, didn't even acknowledge him. And he went and sat down at one of the blackjack tables. And at that point, Bob noticed this other guy who he seemed to recognize as like a security personnel person, whatever, from S4. And this guy was following Dennis. So Lazar went into the blackjack room and he approached where Dennis was sitting. And he said kind of loudly enough for like the dealer and the other gamblers around to hear him. He said, well, Dennis, you said you wanted to meet and here I am. What's the deal? And Dennis kept ignoring him. He like didn't even acknowledge that he was there, didn't look up from his cards, just, business as usual, paid him no mind. So, they're in a crowded casino. Bob didn't want to like make a scene and make the situation worse. So at that point, he basically just walked away and left, and him and his 2 buddies left the casino. But I think this is kind of interesting. They later theorized, like when they were talking about this encounter, that this security personnel that they recognized from S4 might have not actually been with Dennis, but was rather like following or monitoring him. And, for some reason, maybe if he was seen talking to Lazar after everything that had happened, he would get in trouble with his superior. So basically, like this Bob Lazar guy was your underling. Now it's your problem. You've got to take care of this situation type deal was my understanding.
I mean, just to spin another possible theory on this one, maybe part of the intention was basically that they wanted to try to get Bob into a specific place. Dennis wasn't supposed to draw any attention to himself, and this other guy was supposed to try to nab Bob, but Bob recognized him. So after that happened, they had to evade the plan then, because as soon as Bob looked at him, I'm sure the security guy would have been like, oh shit, he knows exactly who I am. But maybe the intention was, Dennis was supposed to keep leading Bob closer and closer, potentially to like a door or somewhere,
So
essentially the security guard
throw him in the back of a van.
Yeah, could essentially just like ambush this guy and completely take him out without him even knowing who he was. But again, maybe Bob drew too much attention because he kept trying to call Dennis out directly, and he looked directly at the security guard. So they were like, shit, we got to pick a different plan out for this one.
No, I think that's a really good thought. And, maybe Bob, being so public with all this kind of helped save his life in a way,
Yeah, and like you were kind of saying, maybe it's like a matter of him trying to deal with his own endeavors. Like maybe this was like Dennis is like, all right, I got to deal with this problem myself. And maybe that guy and this whole thing was Dennis's plan to try to take care of it before, his boss had to step in and try to take care of it.
Exactly, which I think makes a lot of sense. But anyway, so following this like failed meeting with Dennis, Bob Lazar was contacted again by George Knapp, and he asked if he'd be willing to do a second interview and kind of talk some more about his experiences and, just the whole S4 situation. So Lazar agreed, and he kind of decided that at this point he needed to not only show his face on camera, but also reveal like his real identity. So this second interview was filmed at the KLAS TV studio, and after this interview aired, this is when the story kind of seemed to really go mainstream, and it was picked up by, media outlets all over the world. At one point, Bob was like even invited to go to Japan and talk about this whole situation. But, with everything going on and him being so much in the public eye, he decided that probably wasn't a good idea.
Was Bob Lazar ever on Coast to Coast? Just random thought.
I mean, I'm sure at some point he has to have been. I don't know for a fact, but I mean, kind of what I was going to talk about next. Like, he has not shied away from any media exposure or talking about this story, especially in recent years. So it seemed to me that he would have had to be on there at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what was it? The second newest documentary about him even had Mickey Rooney doing like the narrative voice for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't actually seen the newest one yet, but we're going to talk about it a little bit here in a second.
This one's the second newest one, not the newest one that just came out that re-sparked the interest, but the one that came out, I'd say like around the time when I started the podcast, maybe like 3-4 years ago.
So put that on the back burner. We're going to talk about the documentaries and stuff here in a second.
Perfect.
So anyway, like I said, Bob has not shied away from any sort of, media exposure. And he's talked about his experiences at S4 and his theories and thoughts a lot more in subsequent years. And this is like
Mickey Rourke, by the way. Sorry,
okay,
I said the wrong
Rourke.
name. Sorry, I wanted to be specific. Mickey Rourke.
So he's kind of become like this infamous figure in ufology and conspiracy circles. Like, people who aren't even into this sort of thing kind of know who Bob Lazar is at this point. And him and George Knapp, to a certain degree, are frequently credited with like bringing the idea of Area 51 into like the public consciousness. Apparently before this Bob Lazar story broke, it wasn't, nearly as much a thing. And that was kind of surprising to me. Our whole lives, Area 51 has just been like this thing. So it's kind of odd to think that, basically within our lifetimes or a little bit before in your instance, like Area 51 just wasn't this known thing that people talked about,
It's so crazy to think about in that context, because just being, I guess, a millennial diving into this stuff, it's like your main two that you always started with were Area 51 and Roswell. So it's like, sometimes it's like it's hard to like differentiate that, like, that phenomenon hasn't been around for like as long as the other one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's always like the thing in my head is it's like, oh yeah, when you think about like all the sci-fi alien stuff, you think about like the 50s and everything. And it's like, yeah, you think about Area 51 not being in the mindset until what, like the 90s? Like that's crazy to think about. That's almost like just a weird analogy for this. But like when we think, our generation thinks of the standard Dorito flavors, we think of nacho and then we think of the Cool Ranch. But then it's like mind blowing to think that it's like Doritos were taco flavored, and it wasn't until the 90s that they created those flavors, and those aren't even the original flavors. It's like you've always existed in this paradigm, so you don't know anything different.
Yeah, and I mean, Area 51 is so much in the mainstream and the public consciousness. Like, the minor league baseball team in Las Vegas is called like the Las Vegas 51s, or like used to be. Anyway.
Apparently, that team isn't around anymore, because I just figured out about that team the other day from Nomar, and I went to go look for a hat, and yeah, unfortunately that team does not exist anymore.
Well, that's a real shame. But anyway, it used to exist. So this thing was so prominent that like a fucking baseball team was named after it. And yeah, like this is only like 35 years old, which blew my mind.
We should start a petition to bring that baseball team back, at least for the minor league team, since they're doing all these other teams this year.
Yeah, I mean, they just like really missed the boat. They were just ahead of the curve on the whole like high strangeness baseball team thing, weren't they?
Dude, and talk about just anybody that's like a tourist coming to that area. I mean, you're selling a baseball hat to almost everybody. Like, what are you doing, man?
So anyway, this is something that we talked about a little bit in the first part, and I promised we would hit a little bit harder in part two, so we're to that point. The other thing that Bob Lazar is like really notable for popularizing is the concept of element 115. And element 115 is now known as moscovium, and it's this extremely radioactive element that decays within milliseconds. And it was not artificially synthesized until the year 2003, which, like you said earlier, is long after Bob Lazar began talking about this in public. And stable isotopes of the element have still not been synthesized. And I've got like kind of a schematic that shows some of the information about this element for anybody that is interested. I am not a scientist or a chemist or anything like that, so I don't even know what half this shit means. But if anyone that's watching is interested, there's some information about it.
You want to hear something extremely lame? Guess what the Las Vegas 51s became?
I know there's a team like the Las Vegas Aviators. I don't know if that's the same one.
Yep, the Las Vegas Aviators. How lame is that? You go from the 51s to the Aviators?
Hey, maybe
so
it's a John Lear connection at that point, though.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, you're kind of right. It does look kind of like the Wings thing. I mean, the old baseball logo was pretty sweet. It was literally like a gray alien, but like the top of its head was like a baseball.
Stitching on his head.
Dude, I dig it. I'm going to try to find one of these hats somewhere. I really think it's really, really cool. But
man,
yeah, Las Vegas Aviators, man. Like,
you need to look up,
what are you doing?
The 47 brand. They're the one who makes like all the kind of like dad hats of all the baseball teams and well, pretty much any sports teams. But they do a lot of like classic teams and stuff. They might have one, so you need to look into that.
I'm going to look it up because I've been looking for a Vipers hat too. I don't know if you know who the Detroit Vipers are. It was like I don't even want to say minor league, but it was like a not major league hockey team, whatever the fuck you'd call that, a semi-pro like hockey team. And yeah, they had some of like the best, most recognizable like 90s merch. It was like the bright teal and the purple and like the black and shit like that. And it had like this big teal like snake head. I'm looking for one of those hats and I can't find them anywhere. But when I was a kid, dude, it was like everybody had Detroit Vipers merch everywhere.
Well, I mean, I guess at that point, like the Pistons and the Lions and even the Tigers wasn't anything to write home about. So.
They got rid of all the good team names and they kept all the lame ones. Yeah. Apparently that's what they're doing everywhere.
All right, so jumping back in, according to Bob Lazar, this element 115 is extremely dense, and the dense nature of this element is what allows these extraterrestrial crafts and their propulsion system to create this anti-gravity field that we talked a lot about in part 1. But since, he's kind of come out and started speaking on all this, his life has kind of been a whirlwind. He's remarried, so this will be his third wife. And he started a company called United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies, and this is basically like a chemical supplies company.
Mouthful, like all these names.
Yeah. So do you have anything else, Shane, before we jump into our next section?
No, you can hop right into the next section, sir.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the criticism that Bob Lazar has received throughout the years. So kind of like I disclaimed in the first episode, a lot of this information I got is straight from Bob Lazar's book. It's straight from the horse's mouth. I wanted to get his account of all these things. So, I mean, it has kind of been not necessarily a neutral, outsider view of a lot of this information. But Bob Lazar does have a lot of critics, and people often point to like his claimed educational record. For example, Lazar claims that he got a master's degree from both MIT and Caltech. What's funny about that is Caltech is where Jack Parsons was doing all his stuff. So another weird.
Maybe there's a little nod there.
Yeah. But both of these universities allegedly show no record of him ever attending. And he's been questioned about like his time at these universities, and allegedly he's been unable to provide like the names of any of his professors or fellow students. I don't think that's that weird and out of the ordinary. Like at this point, I couldn't tell you the name of like any of my college professors. Like the only students I could tell you was like people who were my roommates or close friends. So I don't think that's that weird. But anyway, that's just something that a lot of people point to is he makes these claims about attending these universities. They have no record of them. He can't seem to substantiate it either.
I mean, just to throw something in on the backside of it too. I mean, some of these people that are like, think outside of the box, they're super genius. Like they don't stay in that normal like school structure. So, I mean,
Yeah.
even if he didn't theoretically go to these schools, if he has the, well, for lack of a better term, I don't want to say education, but the smarts to back up everything that he's saying, like who cares about his background and the paperwork that it came from? Like it's irrelevant. You know what I mean? Like, again, a lot of these guys, like, fuck, some of these super geniuses, I mean, they're already doing college classes when they're like 13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
So it's like, I feel like it's like irrelevant where you got it. If you have the smarts to figure this stuff out, it, you know, that's all that really matters. You know, like that, this is the thing that they're getting fixated on, when I feel like this is the least relevant part, when he clearly can break all these things down and explain them at that level already.
Yeah, and I think it's just like low-hanging fruit for people to like kind of nitpick this guy. But something that I do think is kind of interesting is, and again, like he's telling stories and stuff that happened 40 years ago at this point, but there are some contradictions with like dates that he's given. When he claimed to be enrolled at Pierce Junior College, which is located in California. And supposedly, like at the same time, he was also enrolled in MIT, which is obviously in Massachusetts. And this is before like online classes and everything. So it's pretty much impossible that he could have been doing classwork at both of these places at the same time. People also point to the fact that allegedly, like according to his high school transcripts, he graduated in the bottom third of his high school class, and he only took one science class while in high school, and that was a chemistry class. And people have pointed out that, you know, no one with that level of high school performance would have ever been accepted to like MIT or Caltech or anything like that.
But did he have any acting classes in high school?
I don't know about that.
Just out of curiosity, because it seems like when you really start diving into a lot of these people, they just kind of pop out of nowhere and they make this thing happen. Like this almost kind of reminds me of like the Charles Manson thing. Like his background is so shrouded of like, where did he come from? Where did he go? All of a sudden he's just like here, and he's like the middle of this giant story. But with the whole like Bob Lazar thing, whether you want to believe it's true or not, it's like him not having a background can kind of work beneficial for both ways. Because one, you can play off the whole thing like, oh, I was trying to expose the government and they deleted my entire background, which is obviously part of the Bob Lazar story.
Yeah.
But on the other side, of course, it's like you can also play off the whole like, oh, you know, the whole reason why like you can't find me or anything like that. It's because, you know, the government actually brought me in and actually like filled me into all these spots. And it wasn't relevant until it actually kind of came to that point where they were just like, oh, who's this guy? Like it just kind of adds more into like the muddying the waters concept. It's almost like you could view it from the point of like, almost like disclosure, that they were trying to like soft disclosure some of this stuff. Like if he was the one that kind of familiarized everybody with the concept of Area 51, like maybe that was intentional, because we always talk about on the show that it's like, if you're going to be doing these experiments, you kind of almost have to have somewhere where everybody fixates their eye to so that you can do things elsewhere. So it's like, what not a perfect person to pretend like, oh, you know, I was involved in this stuff and now I'm trying to let you know about all the secrets. If you guys want to really know about the UFO stuff, this is where to look, when really everything's happening over here. And the whole intention was this guy was supposed to draw everybody's attention to this Area 51 place where now everybody associates that with UFOs, and they can do everything on the opposite side of the country now.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably get into some more of those type thoughts when we get into like thoughts and theories and conclusions. But kind of hitting on what you said a few minutes ago, like Bob Lazar himself claims that like many of his financial records and education records and even like employment records have been either erased or tampered with by the government, which seems likely to me. Like even if things didn't go so catastrophically wrong in this situation with this guy, it wouldn't surprise me at all if basically like the government did this sort of thing with these people in the know and these, you know, kind of high ranking. Well, Bob Lazar wasn't an official, like didn't hold an official position, but you know what I'm saying? These people in the know, basically, like they'd want to keep these people as ghosts pretty much. So, I mean, I think it's totally believable that the government has fucked with all of his records.
I mean, there's two different ways to view that. I mean, there's either one, they make the person erase as they come into their program. So maybe part of like him coming into the program is they were making his pass erase so that nobody can really figure out who the hell this guy was.
Process, you know, who knows?
That's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And even on the other side of it, it's like if they delete his background and they don't actually take him out, it also kind of makes it so that they muddy the waters a little bit if his story is truthful, because now these low-hanging fruits, like you were saying, like his education, I mean, if they make his records disappear and then they send out a couple agents to go, hey, what happened about this guy's education? Then instantly you can try to take away this guy's credibility without having to, quote, take him out like that. Because if you take him out, it draws too much attention. It's better to just like destroy his financial records, destroy his credibility, everything else you could possibly do so that the guy has nothing left. It's like, this is one of those hard situations where you can definitely view it from a perspective of both lens, of him telling the complete truth and then him being a psyop that is completely playing everybody.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of this is just like low-hanging fruit and trying to discredit this guy. Like, a lot of critics also point to some like questionable legal activity that he's had throughout the years. In 1999, he was arrested for aiding and abetting a prostitution ring. And this resulted from like his connection to this legal brothel located in Las Vegas called Honeysuckle Ranch. And he was supposedly like an investor in this brothel. And this is what I think the funniest aspect of this whole story is. Like, this nerdiest guy you've ever seen in your entire fucking life was like part owner of a whorehouse.
I thought it was a Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, it's a Skinwalker Ranch, all right.
Hey, apparently all these rich nerdy guys are into some weird stuff. I mean, it's no different with Bill Gates with the whole like Epstein thing, possibly. I mean, everybody who has, they seem like they got their stuff together. They're the nerdy guy on the surface. Of course, they got their weird skeletons in their closet, and I'm sure they got some weird kinks.
Yeah, and some of them are just more out there than others. And like,
hey, you got to get your rocks off somewhere. Yeah. And there's only certain places you can ask a girl to dress like a robot and beep you.
And maybe Honeysuckle Ranch, located in Las Vegas, is one of those places.
Hey, maybe you can even get her to dress up like a grain probia. Whatever you're into, man. I'm not judging.
So in 2006, Lazar and like his company that we talked about a little bit ago was charged with and sentenced to probation for, quote, violating laws prohibiting the sale of chemicals across state lines. And this was a violation of the Federal Hazardous Substances Act, which is basically a lot of word salad to be like his company, whatever, shipped chemicals across state lines that they weren't supposed to ship across state lines. So, I mean, it's probably one of those things that's like technically against the law and technically a violation, but I'm not sure how much nefariousness was intended in all this.
They're just trying to get him on every single possible thing they can and slap every single possible thing that they possibly can on him.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, even like the whole like ranch connection or something like that. I mean, it could have been even something totally stupid. Like, he spent some time in the area, and every guy, you're going to go to a strip club. You're going to do something like that, and maybe they like totally spun that into like, maybe he visited this place once, or he went to like a strip club or something, and they spun it where like now his money's invested in this thing. So that now they can connect him into this and try to slander him with it.
Well,
I feel like it's one of those things.
He totally says, no, I was like an investor in this legal brothel. And basically, like you said, the government kind of like held it against him and like used it as low hanging fruit. But no, he totally says, yeah, I was absolutely part of this. So.
Well, like I said, man, fuck it. You got to get your rocks off somewhere, right?
But fast forwarding to 2017, his home.
Question is, though, when did he start that? Because maybe that's the whole reason why his clearance got messed up. Because, it's kind of hard to keep a wife staying with you if you're running a whorehouse.
Well, and this was in 1990 when he was arrested. So, I mean, all this was kind of going on at the same time. It was like 89 when he was working at S4 and all the interviews and whatnot. So, I mean, if he invested in it, it had to be like before all that happened. So, yeah, a lot going on at the same time there.
Talk about a really weird perspective of Bob Lazar. It's like you never really think of him that way. And it's just this weird little detail. Like, oh, yeah, I totally had some money and invested into a whorehouse. Don't care. Whatever.
Like I said, that was my favorite detail of all of this. But
that's one of the best details that I don't think I've ever heard before.
So jumping back in 2017, his home was raided by the FBI as part of a murder investigation. And Lazar was not like personally considered a suspect or anything like that. But supposedly the company did sell a chemical element called thallium to a murder suspect from Michigan. So up there in your neck of the woods. But anyway, this is kind of like...
Didn't Bob Lazar spend some time living up in Michigan for a while?
I'm not
I think
sure
that last documentary that I saw, that I was mentioning a little bit earlier, pretty sure towards the end of that, he mentioned that he was living in Michigan for a while.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't doubt it. I mean, if I was him, I would have wanted to get out of Las Vegas after all this shit.
Yeah, as far away as you possibly can.
But kind of like we were saying,
Lanesburg, Michigan. So yeah, apparently at one point he did live in he apparently owned a scientific equipment company and supply company in Lanesburg, Michigan. So yeah, I was correct. He was living in Michigan.
So maybe that's where, this situation took place, this FBI raiding his home. Maybe that was in Michigan. I just assumed it was still in Las Vegas at that point, but that would actually make a lot more sense. So
I'm kind of curious where exactly, though, in Michigan, because if you remember correctly, there is the giant UFO flap that's on the other side of Michigan. That's always been like a thing, that there's constant UFO sightings over there. So I'm kind of curious if he's anywhere near that. So I'm about to look up the name of that city real quick. If you want to continue on for a second.
While you're
I'll back to you in a second.
I'll just kind of close out my thoughts on this section. Like, all these criticisms that are levied against him, like we said, like if you're picking apart his supposed educational background, if you're picking apart these questionable legal activities and looking for this low-hanging fruit, like, to me, at the end of the day, all that doesn't necessarily mean that he's lying. I mean, he can be absolutely telling the truth about this, and also he invested in a brothel. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And it kind of reminds me of with like the whole missing 411 thing. People point to David Paulides and some questionable things he did while he was a police officer to like discredit all his research. And like, two things can be true at the same time. I mean, you can be correct about your ideas and have done some things you shouldn't have done throughout the years,
Oh, yeah. And by the way, just to bring it up, it is about mid-Michigan, like almost like the dead center of Michigan. I might as well just bring it up on the map here, which is kind of funny because Bob Lazar, if he still lives in this area, probably only lives about 2 hours from me.
Well, maybe
about right here.
Try to find him.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm down over in this area. So, yeah, he lives about 2 hours from me.
There you go.
Well, there you go.
All right, you want to do a break here?
Sure.
All right, so now we're going to kind of jump into miscellaneous and thoughts and conclusions and all that fun stuff. And a lot of this we've kind of already touched on throughout the episode, but like we said, throughout the years, Bob has been the subject of like numerous television shows and documentaries and podcasts. He's probably most notable in how a lot of people found out about him is his 2019 appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. And this is actually the most listened to episode in the history of the show. And it has over 66 million listens. So pretty crazy. All the famous people that Joe Rogan has had on his show throughout the years. And the most listened to episode is with this nerdy scientist guy.
You know what is really, really funny about Joe Rogan? And I'm sure you've seen the clips and all the videos about it. He is completely like withdrawn from the alien thing. Like he barely really talks about it. And right before that happened, there was all these things where he'd be like talking on the podcast and he'd look directly into the camera and he'd be like, "Hey, US government, if you ever want to disclose anything about aliens to me, I'm not going to say a word to nobody about it. I promise you I won't." And he said that like 3 or 4 times. Then all of a sudden he like completely pulled back from a lot of the extraterrestrial stuff, even like the Bigfoot stuff after talking to people like Bob Lazar. And then all of a sudden it's like, again, a lot of the guests that pop onto Joe Rogan now seem very psyop. So it's like just weird connections. Like I think Joe Rogan knows stuff personally.
Well, and it seems like he's talking to a lot more like just comedians and things like that now than he used to. Like he doesn't have all the conspiracy theorists and like the fringe researchers and whatnot on that. He still has them from time to time, but not as much as he used to.
That was like the primary of his show. And yeah, it just seems like he's kind of spun off almost purposefully after, weirdly enough, being more entangled in things. Like he's involved more, it seems like, with government stuff. He was involved a lot with like the Trump stuff and politics and everything. And then as soon as that starts happening, it's like he pulls back on all the extraterrestrial, all the like stuff he was really pushing towards. Again, could it be possibly because he's partially in the know now to some extent? I think it might be possible.
Yeah, definitely so. But kind of
especially considering he runs the biggest podcast out there. I mean, what not a better person to control the narrative?
Well, and like we saw with the election, not to get too political, like he has a very powerful platform. He can, especially young men of a certain demographic, he has a lot of sway over, that group. And so what he says matters to a lot of people. And no matter what you think about the guy, that's true. So, I mean, it would kind of make sense that, one, he is kind of in the know about things, and two, he's having to be a little bit more careful nowadays.
Yeah, he can easily be like, all right, everybody's asking way too much about this alien stuff. Joe Rogan, you need to push people towards UFO.gov.
Yeah, you got to stop kind of stroking the flames on this one. But anyway, so when Bob was on Joe Rogan in 2019, it was kind of to support this documentary that had just come out called Bob Lazar, Area 51, and Flying Saucers. And
that's the one I was talking about, by the way.
And this was created by Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, our boy George that we talked about earlier. And Jeremy Corbell, I'm sure like all of our listeners / viewers, are also familiar with him. He's like the bearded tattoo guy that's like always seen with Bob Lazar. And I've got a picture from the podcast pulled up with Joe and Bob and Jeremy. So anyway, we talked about this a little bit as well earlier this year, just I think like a month or so ago at this point. Another documentary about Bob Lazar was released, and this one is titled S4, The Bob Lazar Story. And I believe it's currently available on Amazon. It's not on Amazon for free. You still have to like rent it or buy it. So I haven't actually seen it yet, but as soon as it shows up for free, I'm going to check that out. But it
was on Netflix for a while, actually. I'm surprised that it got moved to Amazon.
Okay.
It was free on Netflix for a long time. That's how I watched it.
The new one?
Oh no, not the new one. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the one, the UFO saucer one. The one you were just mentioning.
Like pretty readily available on like Tubi and all sorts of free things. Like you can definitely find that one for free. But yeah, the new one, you still got to pay for it as of the last time I checked. But that's kind of why Bob Lazar has been, or the subject of Bob Lazar anyway, has been making the rounds here recently. It's because of this new documentary that came out. And so, like I said, I kind of want to just throw our hats in the ring and cover this topic that I'm surprised we haven't talked about before now. But do you have any?
Maybe we can come back around to it at some point once we are able to both actually watch the documentary. And at least if it's, something in Bizarre Inquiries, we can at least touch base and see, what other connections there might be in what we've done with the research on these past 2 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, we can probably talk about it on a Bizarre Inquiries, if nothing else. That would be a good subject for that, I feel like.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So,
by the way, just throwing it out there, if anybody does know of a place that you can watch this for free, legally, wink, wink, let us know.
There you go. Leave it in the comments. But anyway, so kind of some of my conclusions and thoughts and theories on this, and a lot of this stuff we've already touched on throughout the 2 episodes. But, we've kind of been leaning heavy into the whole like interdimensional, ultra-terrestrial type hypothesis lately on the show. But and I know I've said this before, but aliens and UFOs and things of that nature were pretty much my gateway into all this type stuff. And when I first started down this path, I was very much under the persuasion that, okay, if the extraterrestrials are these flesh and blood entities and they're visiting Earth in these nuts and bolts spaceships and they're not like interdimensionals or ultra terrestrials or anything like that, well, Bob Lazar's claims make a lot of sense and they can help to answer like a lot of potential questions in that scenario. Like, for example, if these crafts are powered by element 115, like Bob claims, and it's, this super dense element that bends space and time and, rips holes in our reality. Like I mentioned, I think in the first episode, these entities aren't traveling in like any traditional sense of the word. They're not getting behind the wheel of their spaceship and driving to Earth. They're like
you couldn't even fathom how they're actually traveling because
Yeah.
we couldn't theoretically do that in space. We couldn't do it in water because we'd still have the tension against us. Like we couldn't even fathom how they're traveling.
Yeah, and this, gets into wormholes and portals and E=mc² type stuff and all sorts of stuff that we're not smart enough to really talk about. But what I think is kind of interesting in light of all this is, and this is something I've kind of been kicking around for a while, and I'm sure I've talked about it on the show before. It's probably been a while now at this point, but if the super dense element is what's powering these extraterrestrial propulsion systems, and it is basically bending or ripping the fabric of time and space, it kind of makes sense to me that like cryptids and other interdimensionals or even like ghosts and things like that are these beings that are like briefly able to access our reality through these like little rips or holes or pinpricks or whatever you want to call it in this fabric of time and space. So I think that makes a lot of sense if you take all of Bob's story on the surface. And it also can help to explain why, cryptids and UFOs are often seen together and why there's, very rarely any physical evidence for cryptids because, they're only here for these brief moments when these situations are right. So, all that was super long-winded and rambling, but that's basically, I think if you accept Bob Lazar's story, it helps to answer a lot of potential questions with a lot of this kind of shit.
Yeah, and it kind of brings in like a new perspective too, because it's like every time you listen to the Bob Lazar story, you kind of pick up on different little details depending on where you are with your research. Because, hearing the Bob Lazar story for the first time, it's really one of those like first, like, all right, this is a really solid, literal, real world connection to the fact that there are reverse engineered UFOs. But then once you start really diving into the story, and coming at it from even our perspective, when we started diving into this like higher dimensional perspective on things, not only is this like an imperialistic idea about how these things function, but it almost starts to kind of touch base on some of these like fourth and fifth dimensional concepts, because just simply off of the fact that this thing ends up being able to bend and manipulate time, like that just shows that, again, that time is malleable and that it's not as physical as we think it is, which instantly proves the fact that if this technology exists, that there are higher dimensions above where we're existing right now. So again, it's weird that you listen to this the first time without having that context, and you view this from a very like real world imperialistic viewpoint of like the extraterrestrial phenomenon. But then when you actually start kind of diving into like the what's happening behind the scenes with all this type of stuff, then you realize that there's even more validity to this story. You just don't realize it until you've been diving into this topic for a while, and you don't pick up all these little details until way later on. Like, again, even just the simple little thing that you mentioned about the Wednesdays at 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. If we hadn't already been talking about the possibility of, humans reverse engineering and actually like using flaps as a possibility to test these things, then that would have been like a piece of information that just would have flew by and you wouldn't have even connected to anything. Yeah. It's like, again, the more you dive into this stuff, the more you realize that this whole higher dimensional perspective is a lot more literal than it is woo-woo, actually.
Absolutely. And, in the book, Bob didn't specifically point out like other dimensions and interdimensional beings and things like that, but he definitely talks about time and space in those ways, and about how our perception of time and space is just so flawed, and it is way weirder than we think. And these crafts supposedly have figured out a way to manipulate gravity and therefore light and time and space. And kind of another point that I thought of while you were just talking, like you said, every time I look into this subject and learn more about it, I take something slightly different from it. I used to be really of the camp that, yeah, what Bob's saying makes a lot of sense. I think I believe him. And now my opinion has changed slightly. Like, I think there's really only two options when it comes to this guy. Either he's some sort of government disinformation agent, like either knowingly or unknowingly, meaning like this guy knows what's going on, he knows what's real, and he's basically spreading this yarn for everybody. Or, he was given these fake documents and this fake information to kind of muddy the waters or make it where he didn't even know what he was working on. And the other option is he's actually telling the fucking truth and all this stuff is real. And I tend to believe that he's telling the truth, or at least some version of it. He's telling the truth, I think, as
the things that prove that he's telling the truth could also potentially prove that he's lying from the same perspective, which is what makes this story so hard and so layered.
Exactly. So I believe he's telling the truth as he believes it. Whether that means what he's saying is actually verbatim 100% true, I don't know. Because, like we said, this gets back to so much of the government experimentation and the human intervention. And then when you talk about like Zeta Reticuli and the Betty and Barney Hill connections and the whole John Keel thing, there's so many ways to go with this. So long story short, I think my opinion on this story has changed slightly. I still believe Bob. I just, at this point, kind of tend to believe that what the government told him and what he believes might not be the whole story or the real story.
See, I slight tweak on that. I think that, for lack of a better term, and I hate to call Bob this specifically, but I almost kind of feel like they almost kind of use him as a, quote, like, useless idiot, in the sense of, like, he fully believes everything that he was saying. He experienced everything that he was saying, but everything that he saw, everything that he experienced was all things that they were intending to get out. Like, I think that they looked at this guy, looked at his record of him kind of almost being like a little like off the rails, out of the box, you know, making that jet propulsion car.
Kind of a weird
like
guy.
They almost were kind of like, yeah, he's an off-colored kind of strange guy. They're like, he's really, really smart, though, so he'll actually understand what we're saying and be able to break this down for people to kind of simplify it so people will understand.
But
so I think that he
checkered past we could take advantage of if we need to.
See, I think that they completely used him to try to disclose this stuff to people. He was supposed to be that bridge in between, like, the scientist and the common man, to be able to disclose some of these ideas and to break things down. So, like you were saying, I believe that Bob fully thinks that he is telling the truth and that he is out here telling his full story from what he knows of it. But I believe that that story that he is telling was created for him and without him knowing that it was.
Yeah, and I tend to kind of agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And I think that kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier with Bob is very black and white. He's saying what he experienced. He's saying what he saw. He's not, and in later years, he, you know, theorizes more so. But at the end of the day, he's not claiming to have all the answers to all of this. And I think a lot of the criticisms on him is people kind of extrapolating things from what he actually does say. And yeah, I think, like we said, that's my kind of take home point for all the listeners and viewers tonight is I believe Bob believes what he's saying. I believe Bob. I just think a lot of the things that's going on and he experienced, it might have been some sort of smoke screen, or I don't even want to use the word psyop because I feel like it's so overused now, but I think smoke screen is a better word, or, you know, blatant misinformation that the government wanted to get out there, like you said. But yeah,
that almost makes you wonder about, like, the experiments with Dennis, if it was actually like what you thought it was, or if it was some like machine that was just intended to be created to try to like mess with Bob. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing shooting up at the ceiling and the watch stopping, like, if you were intending to like show somebody that this machine works and this is how it works, that doesn't seem like that would be hard things to fake. And if you were potentially
especially in this controlled environment.
Yeah. And if this was around the time that you're almost trying to like trick your enemies into thinking that you're working on things so that they're almost like a little bit more scared of you, then of course it's almost like the AI thing. You're faking it till you make it. You know, a lot of the time these projects don't actually work until you actually get the money to fund them. So it's like, I'm curious if that initial invention even worked or if it was just intended to be a show for Bob in the first place.
And that's a crazy point that I didn't think about during the course of all this research. This is still, is at the tail end, but this is early 1989. This is during the Cold War. So maybe they wanted this information out there. The government, that is.
Yeah, to make it seem like they were working on secret government projects. Like, come mess with us, come try to strike us. We got secret government projects that we're working on here. We got alien technology. Exactly.
Yeah. Wow, that's a crazy thought. I kind of can't believe I didn't put those pieces together in the months I've been working on this series. But that's, you know, what's so great about this show and us kind of getting able to bounce off of each other and bounce ideas against the wall and see what sticks, because we come up with this stuff that we probably wouldn't have otherwise, you know?
Hey man, different set of eyes, different set of prize sometimes. That's what's always the best part about doing these shows with two minds. Like, I don't know how people run these like deep dive topic shows with only one person, because half the time it's like the conversation in between is where I feel like we end up figuring out the most stuff that people didn't actually think about. So it's like, man, I don't know how people do these kinds of like deep dive shows without bouncing off of somebody.
Just get tunnel vision with like research or even presenting the stuff. And like you said, it just takes a different perspective and kind of talking through things to put a lot of these pieces together. But I feel like
otherwise you end up like Alex Jones and just screaming out the microphone by yourself.
You can do that if you want to, but yeah, I feel like I've kind of rambled on enough tonight. Do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners, Shane?
I think I have all my closing thoughts on this one for now, as far as what I kind of believe as far as the Bob story goes. I'd love to give some more thoughts after I see this new documentary, because it seems like with every new documentary that comes out, Bob almost like gives away a new little piece of the puzzle. And like we said, I mean, maybe that's intentional, maybe it's not, but I'm kind of curious to see if the idea of everything that we talked about changes at all after seeing the documentary. And hopefully, yeah, we'll end up doing an update on that once we both get a chance to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Once we both see it, I think we should totally hit on that in the future. Like I said, I think that would be a great topic for Bizarre Inquiries. And if you guys want us to talk about anything related to this in the future, definitely hit us up. There's still a lot of good information and a lot of good conversation to be had with this topic. It's a never-ending topic. So if you guys want more of this, just let us know. And if you guys are...
And big thank you, by the way, to you, Orin, for putting this one together. This one was absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate, by the way, just to throw this one out there, the fact that you can take some of these topics that seem like they're, semi talked about things within the community, and you're able to kind of bring like a new perspective on it. Like maybe it's just the fact that we're able to like talk about these things a bit. But again, I just really wanted to say that I appreciate the fact that even though we cover some of these topics that are things that people have already heard about in the community, it's really cool that when you do them, we always end up getting a new perspective on things. And hopefully we're able to bring something new to the listeners, because it seems like a lot of the time we do get a new perspective on these things.
Well, first off, thank you for the kind words. That really does mean a lot to me. And secondly, like we always talk about, I think it's just the more you know and the more you research and the more you look into things, that's when you start seeing these connections. And if we didn't have, years under our belt of looking at this stuff, we wouldn't see a lot of these connections. And I think I mentioned this. I don't know if it was on camera or off, but I spent months working on the Zodiac Killer series. I was like, okay, coming off of that one, I'm just going to do, something simple, something that I know I can knock out pretty easy, and it's going to be a quick one. And then I got reading the Bob Lazar book, and I'm like, man, there's a whole lot more to this than like the facts that everybody knows. So I just spent another couple of months working on this one. So hopefully the next thing I work on will be a little bit more lighthearted and not just a super duper long information dump for you guys. But yeah, this was a fun one to put together. Like I said, kind of can't believe we hadn't touched on it before, but I'm glad we waited till now, because a lot of the things that we talked about, we wouldn't have known 2 years ago,
Hey, man, I always say it on the show. Everything happens for a reason, man. I feel like with a lot of our research, when we end up recovering stuff randomly and when we end up falling into place with things that we should have covered a long time ago, it's always seems like it happened for a reason. And it's always this continuous string that we're pulling on with this like human connection to UFO stuff that I don't know what it is, but it's almost like every episode we do, we find another piece of that puzzle.
And I know we're going a little long for you guys tonight, but that's something I've been thinking about here recently is a lot of these topics that we covered early in the show. I think we need to go back and readdress and relook at that information and kind of look at it with a fresh set of eyes and revisit these topics. And I think, the conversation would go far different than it did 2 years ago.
I mean, just even off of how we are as from when we first started the show, man. I'm kind of curious to cover some of our very first episodes that we covered together and see how they turn out now.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of rounding things out, Shane, you got anything else?
Nope, that's it for me. If you want to start wrapping the show before we go too long, man.
All right, I know we've gone down a lot of rabbit holes, so thank you guys for sticking with us tonight. But if y'all are interested in supporting the show and all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, Shane, tell them what they can do.
First and foremost, you guys can go and check out our Patreon with one tier over there with full access for $2.50 a month, a little bit cheaper than a bag of chips, cheaper than a can of soda. And with that, you guys can support the little guys. And if you guys are curious to see what it's all about, there's a 7-day free trial available. And if you guys like it, hopefully you guys will end up sticking around.
And you guys can check out the Bizarre Reality Media merch store with t-shirts starting at the bizarrely specific and astoundingly low price of $15.68 plus shipping. Gee Willikers.
Ooh-wee. And I know times are tough out there, but if you guys would like to support the show in some other ways, you guys could always leave a review or rating anywhere that you guys happen to listen to the podcast. And Orin, what are the general rules for that?
1 and 5 stars only.
And with that, of course, you will get our love and appreciation, or you'll get our ridicule, but either way, we'll have fun with it, and hopefully you'll end up having fun with it.
And you guys can also share the show with your friends or family or anybody that you think would enjoy the show, and you can share it also with your enemies and people you think would not enjoy the show. Either way, we don't really care. Just share the show with somebody.
And if you guys would like to keep up to date on the show, Orin, how can they do that?
Follow the show on Instagram and Facebook and the TikToks and the YouTubes and all those things. You guys know how the internet works.
And you guys can also catch live shows and video content on the Bizarre Reality Media TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels.
And if you guys have some free time, please check out and show some love to our awesome friends of the show and our sponsors. We've got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. And we got our buddy Joe with Cryptoteology for your wowable cryptids.
Oh, cryptids. And if you guys have a little bit of additional time, don't forget to go and check out Dimension Devices to get yourself some paranormal investigating equipment. And you guys can also check out Sticker Mule if you guys need any t-shirts, stickers, or anything like that for your podcast, local business, anything like that. And if you guys want any additional discounts or credits, there are some available for you guys down in the show description, so you guys can go and check those out.
And as always, everything we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And just like I have to remind you guys every single show, because I'm always afraid that you guys might forget, and if you guys want to be listeners of the most bizarre show in the universe, you guys will always have to remember that you guys have to stay and remain bizarre, bizarre, bizarre.
When we go into Honeysuckle Ranch.
What is that?
It's a UFO!
Let's go, Ken.